I still remember the way the chandelier light glinted off Linda's pearl necklace that night. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's house. She had made her usual roast chicken, the one she always bragged was better than anything Anna could cook. I'd heard that jab before, so I just smiled politely and took my seat at the end of the table. Daniel sat across from me, chatting with his mother about some work thing I couldn't follow. I stayed quiet, sipping water, hoping the evening would pass without one of Linda's lectures. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room. The plates clinked softly. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then Linda put down her fork, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked on me, and there was a look there I'd seen before, the one she wore when she was about to say something designed to cut deep. "Anna," she said, her voice smooth but sharp at the edges. "You are too cheap for my son. Get out of his life." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy, like the pause before a storm breaks. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to speak up, to defend me, to say, "Mom, that's not fair." But he didn't. He laughed. A short, ugly laugh that sounded nothing like the man I thought I'd married. And then, God help me. He nodded. "Yes, Mom," he said lightly, as though they were talking about the weather. I felt something crack inside me. My cheeks burned hot, but my hands went cold. The room seemed to tilt a little. The soft clinking of cutlery from the kitchen suddenly felt too loud, like it was echoing in my skull. I don't even know how long I sat there, frozen, staring at the tablecloth pattern. It felt like every meal, every conversation, every shared moment we'd had in that house was suddenly poisoned. Linda smirked, leaning back in her chair, clearly satisfied. Daniel avoided my eyes, as if this was something minor I'd get over. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped against the tile, and the sound made both of them glance at me. "I'll save you the trouble," I heard myself say. My voice was calm, too calm. I grabbed my purse from the side table, slipped my phone into it, and headed for the door. Linda didn't say a word. Daniel stayed seated, not one step after me. When the door clicked shut behind me, the cool night air hit my face, and only then did I realize I was shaking. Not just from hurt, but from something else, something I couldn't name yet. I walked to my car and sat inside without starting the engine. For a few seconds, I just stared at my hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw Sophie's name. I answered with a whisper. "Sophie, I'm leaving, for good." She didn't ask why. She just told me to come over. Her voice was warm, steady, like a lifeline I could grab before I drowned. The drive to her apartment was a blur of streetlights and red taillights. I could still hear Daniel's laugh in my head, playing over and over. It was strange. I'd imagined so many versions of us falling apart in arguments or long silences, but never like this. When I reached Sophie's place, she opened the door before I could knock. Her arms went around me instantly. I buried my face into her shoulder and felt the tears finally start to fall. We didn't talk much that night. She made me tea and sat with me on the couch while I stared at the wall. Every now and then she'd squeeze my hand and I'd squeeze back. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I didn't know how I'd explain this to anyone, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back there. Before that night, before those words that sliced through me like glass, there was a time I thought Daniel was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I met him 5 years ago at a charity event my school was hosting. I'd been roped into helping organize the silent auction, not exactly my idea of a thrilling Friday night. My hands were full, balancing a tray of brochures, when a tall man in a navy suit stopped to hold the door for me. "Looks heavy," he'd said with a smile. "Want me to take some?" I remember laughing, a little awkward. "Only if you want to risk paper cuts for a stranger." Somehow, that turned into him helping me set up the tables, making jokes about bidding on the world's most boring items. He stayed until the last guest left, and by then I knew his name, his job, and that he made me feel seen. Daniel was charming in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. He listened, really listened, when I talked. Our first date was at a small cafe by the river. He'd shown up with my favorite coffee order, something I'd only mentioned once in passing. Little things like that made me think he was different. When we got married a year later, I truly believed we were a team. But not everyone shared my enthusiasm. From the very beginning, Linda made it clear I didn't measure up. She was polite enough at the wedding, but even that day, I caught the way she looked at my dress, a dress I'd chosen for its simple elegance, but which she clearly thought was plain. The first time she visited our apartment, she scanned the living room like she was inspecting a bargain store. "You don't have much furniture," she'd said. Daniel's last girlfriend had a real eye for decorating. I laughed it off then. So did Daniel. "Don't take it personally," he told me that night. "Mom just speaks her mind." At first, I told myself he was right. Linda was from a different generation, a different world. She'd grown up with money, vacations abroad, and a belief that quality meant having a brand name stitched into the fabric. I came from a modest background. My parents were teachers. We counted every penny, and my idea of a splurge was buying the nicer pasta sauce. I figured over time, she'd see the things that really mattered, that I loved her son, that I supported him, that I was loyal. But if anything, her comments got sharper. She'd make offhand remarks about my job. "Teaching must be nice, all that time off," or "Daniel works so hard, it's a good thing you don't have to pay for the house yourself." I tried harder to win her over. I hosted dinners at our place even though cooking for her made my stomach twist with anxiety. I bought dresses I couldn't afford, thinking maybe if I looked the part, she'd stop comparing me to Daniel's exes. Daniel would just shake his head when I complained. "She's always been like this. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. It was like death by 1,000 cuts, small enough to ignore at first, but constant enough to leave scars. One Christmas, I saved for weeks to buy Daniel a watch I knew he'd been eyeing. When he opened it at his mother's house, Linda smiled tightly and said, "Oh, that's nice. His ex bought him one just like it, but in gold. Gold lasts longer." Daniel laughed. I forced myself to laugh too, but inside, I felt something sink. Sophie noticed it long before I admitted it. "She doesn't respect you," she told me once over coffee. "And Daniel, he's not doing anything to change that." I'd brushed it off then, saying, "It's not worth making a big deal about." But deep down, I think I knew Sophie was right. Linda's opinion wasn't just her opinion anymore. It was seeping into the way Daniel treated me. Still, I kept telling myself we'd find common ground someday, that if I just held on a little longer, the tension would ease. I didn't know it at the time, but the storm was already building, and the night it hit, it would take everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Looking back now, I think the worst part wasn't the big insults. It was the little ones. The ones that came wrapped in a smile, disguised as casual comments, but left bruises just the same. Linda had a talent for them. If I cooked for the family, she'd taste a bite, tilt her head, and say, "Not bad, but Daniel likes a bit more seasoning. I'll teach you sometime." If I wore a dress I loved, she'd smile and say, "Pretty, but maybe something more fitted would flatter your figure." Even the way she greeted me sometimes felt like a performance. "Oh, Anna, you look comfortable." At first, I told myself it was just her way, but over the years, the comments piled up like stones on my chest. Daniel never told her to stop. If anything, he'd chuckle like they were harmless jokes. Sometimes he'd even join in. One Sunday, we were at her house for lunch when she brought up the topic of real women knowing how to keep a man happy. She looked straight at me and said, "Daniel grew up used to certain things. Homemade pies, polished shoes, little notes in his lunch. Some women just understand the value of effort." Daniel laughed and said, "Well, Anna's not really the pie-making type." I forced a smile, but inside it stung more than I wanted to admit. I tried to change. I really did. I started baking, though I burned more pies than I care to count. I ironed his shirts every Sunday night. I even tried to make peace with Linda, offering to help her with errands, picking up things she needed, or dropping by with flowers. Nothing worked. One time I arrived at her place with a basket of fresh fruit from the market. She looked at it and said, "Oh, not organic?" It was like that with everything. If I gave an inch, she'd point out the mile I didn't give. Family gatherings became something I dreaded. I'd sit at the edge of conversations, pretending to be interested in small talk while bracing for whatever comment she'd throw my way. Sometimes it was about my clothes, sometimes my cooking, sometimes even my job. She loved to remind me that teaching wasn't real work, that it was cute I had all those holidays off. I bit my tongue every time because I knew if I spoke up, Daniel would say I was overreacting. And maybe that's what hurt most. The fact that my husband, the man I'd promised my life to, didn't see me as worth defending. There were moments when I thought about leaving. Sophie told me more than once, "You deserve better, Anna. You know that, right?" But I'd shake my head, convincing myself that love meant sticking through the hard parts, that if I kept showing Linda kindness, she'd eventually meet me halfway. Deep down, though, I knew I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. The turning point came one summer afternoon. We were having a barbecue in Linda's backyard. I'd brought a salad, nothing fancy, but fresh and colorful. As soon as I set it on the table, Linda looked at it, then at Daniel, and said, "You see? This is why I always told you to marry someone who knows how to put a proper meal together." Everyone laughed, even Daniel. I stood there, holding the serving spoon, feeling my face burn. That night, when I brought it up to him, he shrugged. "She's just teasing. You take things too seriously." And just like that, my feelings were brushed aside again. It wasn't just about Linda anymore. It was about Daniel choosing silence, choosing comfort, over me. Every comment she made and every laugh he gave in response chipped away at the foundation we'd built. By the time that special dinner invitation came, the cracks were already deep. I didn't realize it then, but I was walking into a moment that would break everything wide open. It was a Friday evening when Daniel told me we'd been invited to his mother's for a special dinner. I was in the kitchen grading a stack of essays, red pen in hand, when he leaned against the doorway and said it like it was nothing. "She said she has something important to share. Be ready by 6. I remember looking up, a little surprised. "Important? Like what?" He shrugged. "Don't know, but she sounded in a good mood." A part of me wanted to say no, to make an excuse, but another part, the part still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Linda might finally want to make peace, told me to go. I took extra care getting ready that evening. I wore a simple navy dress, not too casual, not too formal. I pinned my hair neatly, and even put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me. As I looked in the mirror, I told myself, maybe this time will be different. The drive to her house was quiet. Daniel hummed along to the radio, and I kept my eyes on the road ahead. When we arrived, Linda greeted us at the door with a smile. That should have been my first warning. Her smiles often meant she was about to deliver a line with twice the sting. The table was set beautifully. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, and the smell of roast beef drifting from the kitchen. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, it was surprisingly calm. She asked Daniel about work, about a project he was leading. She even asked me about school, though the way she phrased it, "still teaching those little ones," made my chest tighten. I answered politely, and she nodded, pouring herself more wine. Then the shift happened. Linda leaned back in her chair, her eyes flicking from Daniel to me. "You know," she began, her voice warm but with that familiar undertone, "I've been thinking about what's best for my son." I felt my shoulders stiffen. Daniel didn't look at me. "He's worked so hard," she continued, "and he deserves someone who matches his ambition. Someone who compliments him." She paused, letting the words settle. "And Anna, well, you're nice, but you're just too cheap for my son. Get out of his life." It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My fork froze halfway to my plate. My ears rang, but her words were crystal clear. I turned to Daniel, waiting for him to tell her she was out of line. Waiting for him to defend me, to say, "That's my wife, Mom. You owe her respect." Instead, he laughed. It wasn't nervous laughter. It wasn't a laugh to diffuse the tension. It was a laugh that agreed with her. And then he nodded. "Yes, Mom," he said, as if it was the most reasonable statement in the world. My heart dropped so fast I almost felt dizzy. I searched his face for something. A hint of guilt, a flicker of hesitation. But there was nothing. Linda sat there, smug, like she'd just declared the weather forecast. I set my fork down carefully. My hands felt cold, but my face was hot. "I'll save you the trouble," I said quietly. The room went still. I stood, walked to the side table, and picked up my purse. Neither of them moved. Daniel didn't ask where I was going. Linda didn't try to stop me. The only sound was the clink of my heels on the tile and the faint hum of the refrigerator. When I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit me like a wave. I didn't look back. I didn't remember the drive. One minute, I was leaving Linda's dining room with my heart pounding in my ears, and the next, I was standing on Sophie's front porch, gripping the strap of my purse so tightly my fingers ached. She opened the door before I could even knock properly. "Anna?" Her eyes went wide, scanning my face. "What happened? You look—" I stepped inside, my voice breaking. "I can't. Can I just—" She didn't let me finish. She pulled me into a hug so tight it felt like she was trying to hold me together. I didn't cry right away. I stood there, frozen, my cheek against her shoulder, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. Then, as soon as I felt safe, the tears came. We sat on her couch, and I told her everything. Every word Linda had said. Every second of Daniel's silence, the laugh, the nod. By the time I finished, Sophie's hands were balled into fists. She said, "What?" Her voice was sharp, each word clipped. "And he just sat there?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She leaned back, exhaling hard. "Anna, this isn't just about tonight. This has been building for years. You've been swallowing her poison and pretending it's not killing you. I thought—" My voice cracked. "I thought he loved me enough to stand up for me. Even just once." Sophie's gaze softened. She reached over and held my hand. "You did everything you could, but you can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep them warm." I stared at the coffee table, my tears dripping onto my lap. I didn't even realize I was twisting my wedding ring around my finger until Sophie gently stopped me. "Stay here tonight," she said firmly. "You are not going back there." It felt wrong at first, like I was running away instead of fighting back. But the thought of walking into that house again made my chest tighten. So I stayed. Sophie brought me a blanket and a cup of tea, the kind with honey and ginger. She sat across from me, letting the silence settle. Hours passed before I could breathe without feeling like I might shatter. And when I finally spoke again, my voice was low. "I don't know what to do next." "You don't have to know right now," Sophie said. "All you have to do is stop letting them treat you like you're worth less than you are." That night, I lay on her couch, staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the scene over and over, the way Linda's voice was so calm when she said it, the way Daniel's laugh cut deeper than any insult could. I thought about the girl I used to be when I first married him, full of hope, ready to build a life together. I thought about all the times I told myself things would get better if I just tried harder. Somewhere in the quiet, that version of me felt like she was slipping away. By the time morning came, I still hadn't slept. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them break me. The morning after Linda's dinner felt different, not lighter. I was still carrying the weight of every word, every look, but sharper. Like the air had cleared just enough for me to see the truth without the fog of hope clouding it. Daniel hadn't called. Linda hadn't called. Not even a text asking if I was okay. Sophie made pancakes, the kind with blueberries pressed into the batter. She slid a plate in front of me and sat down across the table. "You need to think about what's next," she said gently. I stared at the plate for a moment, then picked up my fork. "I'm not ready to talk about divorce." She shook her head. "I'm not saying you have to. But I am saying you can't just go back and pretend this didn't happen. You need a plan. Her words stuck with me all day. After breakfast, I borrowed her laptop and opened a blank document. At first, I just sat there, my fingers hovering over the keys. I wasn't sure what I was trying to write. A letter, a checklist, a goodbye. Instead, I started listing the things they'd taken from me over the years. Not just money or belongings, but pieces of myself. My confidence, my peace. The way I used to laugh without second-guessing who might be judging me. The list grew longer than I expected, and the longer it got, the more my sadness hardened into something else. By afternoon, I was walking to the small corner cafe near Sophie's place. I needed air, and I needed to think without feeling like every breath carried their voices. The cafe was quiet, just a couple of students tapping on laptops and a man reading the paper by the window. I ordered a coffee and sat down with my notebook. I started sketching out what my next few weeks might look like, where I'd stay if I didn't go back home, how I'd manage my finances without Daniel's income, what steps I'd need to take to make sure I wasn't left with nothing if things escalated. Every line I wrote made me feel a little steadier. It wasn't about running away anymore. It was about building something for myself and making sure they understood exactly what they'd lost. That evening, Sophie found me on the couch again, notebook open on my lap. "You're working on something," she said, her eyes narrowing in curiosity. I closed it gently. "Just figuring out what I need to do." She didn't push. Instead, she nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Later that night, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. There was a single message from Daniel. "You left without saying anything. Mom thinks you owe her an apology." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. An apology? For what? Existing? For not letting her tear me apart quietly? I didn't reply. Instead, I slipped the phone into my bag and went back to my notes. Because now, the decision was made. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. I wasn't going to explain myself, and I wasn't going to warn them about what was coming. The best part was, they would never see it coming. 2 weeks after I left that house in tears, I wasn't the same woman anymore. The heartbreak was still there, sure, but it had hardened into something sharper, focused. I'd spent those days collecting every single thread I could weave into a rope strong enough to pull the rug right out from under Daniel and Linda. Bank statements, receipts, text messages, even short audio clips of Linda calling me too cheap and Daniel laughing about it with her. Sophie called it my arsenal. And I had one more weapon. My name on the mortgage and on the business loan Daniel took 2 years ago. That meant I could legally withdraw my guarantee. If I did, the bank could demand he pay it all back at once. And I knew he couldn't. I wasn't going to do this quietly. Linda loved her public image almost as much as she loved reminding me I didn't fit into it. So when I found out she was hosting a big Sunday brunch for family and Daniel's business associates, I knew exactly when to make my move. That morning, I wore a tailored navy dress, my hair loose, and my confidence like armor. Sophie drove me there, parking a little down the street. When I stepped inside, the smell of expensive coffee and buttered croissants filled the air. Guests were laughing politely as Linda floated between tables, her pearls catching the light. Then she saw me. Her smile faltered for half a second before she plastered it back on. "Anna," she said too sweetly, "I didn't realize you were invited." "I wasn't," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "I came to say a few words." The room quieted. Even Daniel, halfway through a conversation with a client, froze. I walked to the center of the room, my heels clicking against the polished floor. "I won't take much of your time," I began. "I just wanted to clear up a few things before I go." From my purse, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Linda's voice filled the room, sharp, dismissive. "You are too cheap for my son. Get out of his life." Then Daniel's low chuckle followed, along with him saying, "She's right, Anna." The room was dead silent. All eyes were on them. Daniel's face drained of color. Linda's lips tightened. I slipped the phone back into my purse. That was the day I left. But what you don't know, I said, looking directly at Daniel, is that my name is on your mortgage and on your business loan. And as of tomorrow, I'm pulling out of both. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. That means, I continued, the bank will demand immediate repayment, which I know you can't afford without selling this house. Linda's eyes flashed. You wouldn't dare. I already did, I said evenly. And in case you're wondering, I've accepted an offer on my half of the property. I paused, letting the words sink in. The buyers are the Thompsons. I hear you've never liked them much, Linda. A few guests coughed to hide their laughter. And one last thing, I added, turning back to Daniel. Some of your top clients have agreed to move their contracts to my new business. I'll be meeting with them next week. The silence that followed was delicious. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth had already done the damage. I smiled, gave a small nod to the stunned crowd, and walked out the front door without another word. 3 days later, they showed up at Sophie's cafe. Linda's hair was limp, her makeup uneven. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept. Anna, Linda began, her voice trembling. We were wrong. I was wrong. Please, don't do this. We'll lose everything. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air. Then I looked at her, really looked, and saw the same woman who had once smirked as I packed my bags. You told me I was too cheap for your son, I said softly. Now it seems I'm too expensive for both of you. Linda flinched like I'd slapped her. I set my cup down, stood, and placed a few bills on the table. Good luck, I said, and walked out into the sunlight. This time I didn't cry. I didn't look back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free.